The river was swollen from last night's rain, its belly full and brown, swollen like a beast after a feast. It gurgled low, greedy, dragging twigs and memory downstream. The banks, slick with mud, bore no footprints now, just the scuffed grooves of a woman's body dragged through weeds and weeping grass. Willa Langdon's fingers clawed earth as if it might plead for her, but no one listened. The men were already gone, her dead husband's kin, faces hidden beneath stiff collars and righteous fury. They'd muttered words about cleansing and judgment, about how a man's honor had to be restored somehow. She hadn't answered. There was nothing left to say. Her dress clung like a second skin, heavy with filth, her shawl long since torn away by hands that called themselves just. One last shove had sent her down the slope, knees buckling, arms scrambling, before water swallowed the breath from her bones. She didn't scream. Not once. That would have given them too much. The current spun her gently at first, like a leaf not yet ready to fall. Her limbs refused to fight. Cold kissed her skin, then curled inside her ribs. The world grew quiet in her ears. Peaceful almost. After so much noise, gossip, sermons slamming doors, this hush felt holy. But death, like men, can be slow to mean what it promises. Far downstream, beyond the whispering trees and the sun that blinked uncertain behind morning clouds, a horse drank at the edge of the river. Its rider stood beside it, one boot in the water, hat drawn low. His name was Silas Mercer, though the town hadn't spoken it in years. He wasn't the sort you'd call heroic. Quiet, thick-shouldered, carried the look of a man who once knew laughter, but had buried it with someone he loved. His beard was gray at the chin, and his eyes had long since turned away from anything not worth the trouble. But he watched the river, had been watching for a while. Something had snagged his eye upstream, a smear of color where no tree should be. And now, as the form drifted closer, he could see the truth of it. A woman. She looked more ghost than flesh. Her hair fanned behind her like smoke. Her arms floated slack at her sides. He didn't hesitate. Silas waded in, boots slicing mud, water rising to his belt. He moved slow, sure, like a man pulling a calf from winter ice. When he reached her, he gripped under her arms, lifted her with the strength of someone who knew the weight of grief. Willa coughed as the air hit her. A gurgling sound first, then a shiver that rocked her to her spine. Her lips were blue. Her eyelids flickered once. Why? It was barely more than breath. Silas said nothing. He didn't ask her name. He didn't care who she had been. Only that she wasn't gone, not yet. He carried her to his horse, wrapped her in his oilskin, and rode. The cabin wasn't much, just a square of timber tucked into a pine hollow, where even the wind thought twice before whispering. He laid her on the bed and lit a fire with hands that hadn't done so for anyone else in a long time. She dreamed of water and her husband's eyes as they turned on her that last time, of the way his brother spat the word whore as if it explained everything, of her child, small and cold, who'd never made it through last winter. She dreamed of drowning, and the man with the quiet face who pulled her back. When Will awoke, the world smelled of wood smoke and something warm. She blinked at the low ceiling. The ticking of the fire marked the silence like a clock. Her limbs were wrapped in dry quilts, unfamiliar but clean. Every inch of her ached. He sat near the hearth, carving something small and shapeless from a block of cedar. His eyes met hers only briefly. "You're safe here," he said. "Why did you?" Her voice cracked like frost underfoot. He shrugged. "Saw you floating. That's not a reason." Silas didn't answer. Instead, he rose, ladled soup from a pot that smelled of beans and ham, and brought it to her with a hunk of dry bread. She sat up slowly, half expecting pain to keep her down, but it was shame that weighed heavier. "I don't have anything to give you," she said quietly. "I didn't ask." Outside, the sky grayed toward evening. Rain tapped at the shutter like a nervous thought. Willa stared into the bowl, steam curling into her eyes. She ate, though her hands trembled. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, not cruel, just full of what hadn't been said yet. "I'm Willa," she offered finally. Silas nodded. "Mercer." She let the name hang there. It didn't sound like much, but something about the way he said it made her think he'd carried it a long way. And alone. "Do you live here by yourself?" she asked. "Yes." "For how long?" He didn't look up. "Since the war." That was all he gave her. That was all he needed to. In that one sentence, she heard the ache of empty nights, of family graves, of church bells that rang but not for him. Her own ache answered quietly. "I'll leave in the morning," she said. "You can't walk yet. I'll manage. You'll stay until you can stand without shaking." She almost smiled, not because he was kind, but because he was stubborn, and there was something oddly gentle in the way he didn't ask for her story. That night, she slept while the wind pushed rain against the windows like fingers wanting in. Silas sat by the fire again, carving still, shaping nothing in particular, just trying to remember what it felt like to make something with his hands other than fences or graves. In the morning, Willa was gone from the bed. He found her by the barn, barefoot, feeding the chickens with stiff arms. Mud clung to her hem. He said nothing. "I thought I'd earn my keep." Silas paused, then nodded. "There's coffee on the stove." "I don't take sugar," she replied. He smiled faintly, turning back toward the house. She followed. Not because she had to, but because something about the way he walked, steady, quiet, without a backward glance, felt like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared speak. Later that day, they passed each other in the small kitchen. Her sleeve brushed his arm. It was nothing, but it lingered. Neither of them spoke of what happened in the river. Not that day. Not the ones that followed. But sometimes, when the wind turned and the river could be heard in the distance, Willa would pause, and Silas would look up from his carving, and something silent would pass between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something with roots. And still, behind them, the town stirred. The men who'd pushed her into the river drank and boasted. The church doors opened on Sunday, and the pews filled with people who believed in justice, even when it looked like drowning. But the river did not keep her, and neither would shame. Silas lit the lantern that night as the cabin darkened. Willa sat by the window, staring at the horizon, where the trees stood like sentinels. She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't need to. He handed her a blanket. "Gets cold after dark." She took it. "Good night, Mercer." He hesitated. Then, "Sleep well, Willa." And outside, the river went on whispering its old song, but it sounded different now. Less like an ending. More like the start of something worth staying for. The cabin sat quiet in the hush of morning, tucked in its hollow like an old man cupping a secret. Mist clung low to the ground, soft as wool, and the trees held still as if listening. Inside, the fire had burned down to a smolder, and Willa sat wrapped in a borrowed shawl, watching dust dance in a slant of pale light. The room was small but tended. One chair beside the hearth, smoothed by years of use. A table with one cracked plate, a tin cup turned upside down. A shelf of books, most worn, one open and underlined. She hadn't touched anything but the spoon. Silas moved outside like a man who didn't need the world to see him. His footsteps made no noise. He chopped with not as labor, but as rhythm. Every strike felt like punctuation. Willa watched through the window until her shame bit down again. She had no right to be here. That morning she tried to leave, slipped out while the rooster still dreamed and the dew kissed her feet. But she'd barely cleared the path when her legs gave out. Her knees struck earth, breath catching in her throat like a sob she hadn't meant to feel. Silas hadn't said a word when he found her. Just picked her up again, careful as a man handling raw glass, and carried her back inside. Now, she stirred the porridge he'd left on the stove, unsure if she was supposed to eat it or leave it untouched. Hunger won out. She ate in silence, spoon tapping ceramic, each bite more grounding than the last. When the door opened, she didn't look up right away. He crossed the shelf and pulled down a jar of salve. "You still shaking?" "No," she lied. He set the jar beside her. "Rub this on your legs before bed." Willa nodded. Her fingers traced the wood grain of the table, unsure how to say thank you in a way that didn't sound like a debt. "This place is quiet." "Sometimes too quiet," he said, without humor. "Did you build it?" "Mostly." got help with the roof. Everything else came slow. She let that sit. The quiet stretched again, but it wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind that let things rise on their own. Later, she ventured outside, only to find a small goat watching her from atop a stump, head cocked like it questioned her right to breathe. She laughed, surprised by the sound of her own voice. The goat blinked and wandered off, unimpressed. She gathered fallen branches, mindful of her steps, her knees still stiff. The cabin looked different from outside. Less like a hiding place, more like a story paused mid-sentence. A rocking chair leaned against the wall, untouched, its slats worn at the arms. She sat in it and listened to the forest breathe. By midday, Silas was mending a fence out near the pasture. Willa walked the perimeter of the small garden, noting the way the soil curled with life. She knelt and began pulling weeds with slow, deliberate motions. He didn't comment when he saw her hands dirted, just passed her a bucket of well water and moved on. The rhythm of the place accepted her quietly, and she folded herself into it like a thread slipping into cloth. That evening she cooked. Biscuits with too much salt, beans stewed too long. Silas ate them anyway, slow and steady, the lines of his face unreadable. When he was done, he rinsed his plate without a word. She stood at the sink with her back to him, fingers trembling slightly. "You don't have to keep me." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. A man pulls someone from a river. He ought to see what becomes of her. Willa turned. "You think I'll just heal and leave?" He shrugged. "You could. I don't have anywhere else. Then you stay. Until you do." It wasn't a promise. It was something steadier, permission. She sat on the edge of the bed that night, staring at the flame of the lantern as it flickered low. There was no lock on the door, no raised voice, no expectation, just a room with one chair and a man who didn't ask her to be anything but alive. In the following days, she learned the rhythms of the place. The hens clucked like gossips at sunrise. The goat demanded attention mid-morning. A pair of finches nested in the eaves and sang as if paid to keep hope alive. Willa stitched new dish towels out of old flour sacks and mended a split seam on Silas's coat. He accepted each task with a nod, offering neither praise nor refusal. But one afternoon, he wore the coat into town. She didn't go with him. She wasn't ready for eyes yet. But when he returned with sugar and coffee beans, he also brought a spool of blue thread. She didn't ask why. He didn't say. That night, over a supper of cornmeal cakes and smoked meat, he asked, "What happened before the river?" Willa set her fork down. The room shrank in her throat. "My husband died in January," she said. "His people said it was my fault. Said I didn't pray hard enough. Said I tempted sickness with my disobedience." He didn't interrupt. "They said I carried sin in my body, that I'd shamed his memory. His brother, he said drowning was mercy." Silas's face didn't change, but his hands curled slightly on the table's edge. "And you?" "I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I let the river take me." He studied her then, not with pity, but with a kind of gaze that saw bruises under bandages. "You didn't drown." "No. That means something." She shook her head. "To who?" "Maybe just to me." The fire cracked, a single log splitting. She reached for her cup and sipped, though the tea had gone cold. "Why'd you really save me?" she asked, voice nearly gone. Silas stared at the flames. "My wife drowned too. Not in water. In fever." She choked on her own breath, and there was nothing I could do. I held her hand, and it went still. Willa let the silence answer. She was the last person in this cabin besides me. Until you. I'm not her. I don't want you to be. She looked at him then, long and unflinching. "I'm not whole. Neither am I." The space between them softened, not with romance, but with recognition. Two people who had nothing left to lose, finding in each other a strange kind of refuge. Outside, wind stirred the trees. The lantern dimmed. She rose, took her plate to the basin, and washed it clean. He dried it. When she turned toward the cot laid out by the hearth, Silas touched her arm gently. "The bed has two sides." She met his eyes. "I don't want to take her place." "You aren't. It's just a bed." So she lay down on the far edge, stiff with nerves, while he took the chair. He didn't sleep, not right away. Neither did she. They both stared at the ceiling. Two ghosts who hadn't yet learned how to rest. And yet, something had shifted. In the dark, her voice came quiet. "You didn't save me for a reason. You just did." He nodded, barely audible. Sometimes that's the best reason. In the hush that followed, the cabin didn't feel empty anymore. Just quiet, lived in, like a place waiting not for noise, but for breath. The wind sighed outside. Willa's eyes drifted shut, and far off in the woods, the river ran steady, but it no longer sounded like death. It sounded like return. The first time Willa stepped back into town, it was under a pale sky, one that looked like it had forgotten how to shine. She wore a borrowed bonnet and her own silence. Silas walked beside her, not touching, not speaking, but close enough that their steps fell in rhythm. They came for flour, nails, and a coil of rope. Nothing more. But a town doesn't see what it's told to see. It sees what it whispers behind closed doors. At first, only one woman turned. Then another. A hush moved across the street, like wind through dry stalks. Conversations dipped, eyes narrowed. A boy snorted and muttered, "River Witch," before his mother slapped the back of his head and tugged him away. The name stuck in the air like smoke. Willa kept her chin level, but her hands twisted at the hem of her sleeve. Silas said nothing. He just pushed open the mercantile door and let her go in first. Inside, the shopkeeper, Emery Tate, a man who always measured respect with coin and rumor, stiffened behind the counter. His mustache twitched when he saw Willa. He didn't greet them. "We need flour," Silas said evenly. Emery leaned forward, hands splayed across the wood. "Only got 2 sacks left. Then we'll take 1. It's been spoken for." Silas didn't blink. "By who?" "Doesn't matter." Willa stepped forward. "I'll pay." She pulled a few coins from the pocket of her skirt. They were warm from her palm, her last few bits of pride clinking in her hand. Emery's eyes dropped to the money, then to her. "We don't trade with women like you." Silas took 1 step forward, not fast, not loud. But it shifted something in the room. "She's with me," he said. "That's your mistake," Emery replied. A silence fell, cold as sleet. Silas didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "She asked you polite. She paid. You refused. Don't make it my problem next." Then he took the sack himself, dropped the coins on the counter, and walked out. Willa followed, cheeks burning not from shame, but from the dry heat of being stripped in public, without a single hand laid on her. Outside, the world continued on. The blacksmith hammered something invisible into submission. 2 girls played jump rope and fell quiet when she passed. Even the horses stared. They rode home in silence. But that night, Willa chopped carrots too hard and cut her finger. Silas handed her a cloth. She didn't thank him. "Why didn't you leave me there?" she asked, not looking up. He poured coffee. "Wasn't the place for you. And this is—" He shrugged. "You're here. Means something." She tied the cloth tighter. "People think I'm filth. People think a lot. Most of it ain't true." She turned on him then. "You don't know what they said about me." He met her gaze. "Don't care." That silenced her more than any insult could have. Over the next few days, word spread like wildfire on dry grass. Willa Langdon, the drowned widow, was living in sin with Silas Mercer. Townswomen clutched their children tighter when she passed. A pastor named Reverend Burley, a man who once tipped his hat at Willa and called her a pearl among swine, now thundered from his pulpit about the devil's return. "She turned her husband cold with lust and lies," he cried, voice cracking with righteous anger. "And now she beds a recluse with no church, no shame, no soul." Silas never went to church, never explained why. When he was younger, he might have punched someone for less than a sermon. Now he just listened, then went back to his field. But Willa heard it all, every echo, every venom-drenched whisper. She stayed busy, scrubbing floors that were already clean, tending to the garden with unnecessary precision, fixing the split chair leg with a nail that didn't fit. "I'm just tired," she said when Silas offered to help. "You're angry," he corrected, not unkindly. "I'm trying to be worth the food I eat." He didn't answer. just picked up the chair, fixed it right, and set it back down without comment. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind spun with all the things she'd once believed would protect her: honesty, faith, marriage, and how quickly they'd been stripped away. She stepped out onto the porch and stood barefoot in the cool dirt. The stars above seemed impossibly distant. Silas joined her, wordless. He handed her a quilt and sat beside her. "You ever wonder what makes people so eager to hate?" she asked. "No," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "Fear," he continued. "Same as anything else. You lived, and they don't know what to do with that. I shouldn't have. But you did." They sat until the moon carved silver along the trees. Days passed. Willa patched his shirts, cleaned the soot from the lanterns. She planted lavender by the window, though she had no real hope it would take root. Then, one afternoon, she left something by his plate. A shirt newly sewn from old cloth. Stitches uneven. Sleeves too long. He held it up, turning it over, without speaking. "I'm not a seamstress," she said. "But I thought maybe you didn't want to wear the past so much." He folded it with a carefulness that caught her breath. "I'll wear it to town tomorrow." She blinked. "You don't have to." "I know." The next morning, he did. Walked into town with that crooked shirt like it was woven from gold thread. Willa didn't go, but she heard about it before sundown. A girl from the mercantile brought word, pretending to look for goat's milk. "Your fella wore your shirt. Even stood in front of Reverend Burley when he passed." Willa stiffened. "What did he say?" "Said nothing. But the Reverend did. Called him a fool. Said a good woman wouldn't hide in the woods." The girl paused, then lowered her voice. "But we saw the shirt. Kinda nice." That night, Willa didn't ask about it. Just poured coffee, set 2 plates, and ate beside him like it had always been this way. Then, just before bed, she paused by the window. "You make things feel less heavy," she said. "You carry more than most. I don't want to be saved anymore." He nodded. "Then don't be. Just stay." She did. That night, when she turned toward her side of the bed, she left the door to her heart just slightly open. And outside, beneath the sky full of spite and starlight, the lavender began to sprout. The fire started just after midnight, when the wind turned mean and the moon vanished behind a bruise of cloud. Willa was the first to smell it, sharp, acrid, bitter like scorched judgment. She sat up in bed and touched Silas's shoulder. He was already awake. Smoke curled through the crack beneath the door. Outside, the goats bleated in panic, their cries carrying like sirens through the trees. Silas threw on his boots without a word. Willa grabbed her shawl and followed, heart pounding in her throat. The barn was ablaze. Flames climbed the walls in greedy leaps, licking the dry timber with orange teeth. Sparks danced into the sky like fleeing spirits. Silas rushed to the pen first, wrenching open the gate and calling the animals out. The horse tore past him into the night. The goats scattered. Willa saw the line of fire drawn from the brush to the barn. Deliberate. Fed by oil. Someone had come. "Stay here," Silas said, his voice low and rough. He dashed inside the barn, vanishing into the smoke. Willa held her breath, every muscle taut. She could see the roof sagging already, blackening at the seams. Her hands gripped her skirt until her knuckles turned white. Then he emerged coughing, eyes red, dragging out 2 sacks and a small wooden crate, the last of the seed stores, their lifeline for spring. He dropped them on the dirt, and as the barn groaned and collapsed, he turned his back on the blaze like it didn't matter. But it did. By dawn, the structure was a black husk. The sun rose reluctantly, casting gold over the ashes. Willa sat beside Silas on the ground, knees pulled to her chest. Her hair smelled of smoke. His hands were scraped raw. They didn't speak until the wind shifted. "We both know who did this," she whispered. Silas didn't reply. He stared toward the woods, jaw tight. "They want me gone," she said. "They want to be feared," he corrected. "It's not the same." "I should go," Willa murmured. "This isn't yours to carry." Silas turned to her, slow and sure. "You think this is just about you?" She blinked. "Isn't it?" He stood. "No. It's about a town that thinks it gets to burn what it doesn't understand. And I'm done watching." Before she could protest, he walked into the cabin, cleaned the soot from his hands, and pulled on a clean shirt, the one she'd stitched, the sleeves still too long. Willa followed. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to look them in the eyes." She touched his arm. "Alone?" "No," he said. "Not if you'll come." The ride into town was quiet. No anger in Silas's posture, only resolve. Willa sat straight in the saddle, her back aching but her chin high. She wore no bonnet. Her hair blew free in the wind. The townsfolk were gathering like flies around a carcass. Word had spread. Reverend Burley stood on the church steps, Bible in one hand, condemnation ready in the other. He saw them before anyone else. Silas dismounted and held Willa's hand as she climbed down. Together they walked up the dusty main street, past the smithy, past the mercantile, past the gawking children and the murmuring women who clutched their aprons like shields. The sheriff emerged from his office, hand resting lazily on his belt. "You hear about the fire?" he asked, as if it might have started on its own. Silas nodded. "I'm here to say this ends now." "Funny way to ask for justice," the sheriff said. "Marching in like you're owed it." "I'm not asking," Silas said. "I'm telling you. This woman lives on my land. She works it. She eats from it. She's harmed no one. You come for her again, you come through me." Willa's pulse thundered in her ears. She felt the stares prick her skin like needles. From the church steps, the reverend called out, "You defend a woman whose soul's already condemned, Mercer. You share her sin now." Silas turned. The wind stilled. "I buried my wife with my own hands," he said, voice low. "Buried a child, too. I've known loss deeper than your sermons ever dared touch. And I've seen more grace in Willa Langdon's silence than in all your shouting. If she is condemned, then I'll stand beside her and let your God judge us both." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some turned away. Others stared harder. Reverend Burley opened his mouth to speak, but Willa stepped forward. "I drowned," she said clear and calm. "My body didn't die, but my spirit did. They left me to the river, told me I was unworthy of breath. I believed them, until this man pulled me out." She looked around, her gaze settling on faces she once knew. "Not one of you came to my door. Not when my husband fell sick. Not when we ran out of food. But you came with fire. You came with poisoned tongues." Her voice trembled. "Well, I'm still here. And I'm done asking for mercy from those who've never offered it." No one moved. Then Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to the sheriff. "A marriage license," he said. "Signed yesterday." Quietly. Willa stared at him. She hadn't known. He hadn't asked. The sheriff read it and cursed under his breath. "Can't stop you," he muttered. Silas turned to Willa. "You don't have to say yes. But I already signed it. Figured I would if you ever wanted to." Willa stepped back, stunned. "Why?" He didn't smile, just looked at her like she was the only thing he hadn't yet lost. "Because you're not something to be hidden. And because, when the barn burned, all I could think was whether you were safe. That's all I cared about." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but something deeper, recognition. "I said I didn't want to be saved," she whispered. "You weren't," he said. "You were seen." The Reverend tried to shout something about sin, but the crowd had already turned away. Willa took the paper from the sheriff and pressed her thumb to the signature line. Then let it be done. They married that evening beneath the trees behind the cabin. Just them, the blacksmith who once read wedding rites, and the quiet hum of twilight. No dress, no flowers, no crowd. Only truth. Silas held her hand like he might never let it go. Willa's voice didn't shake. When asked if she took him, she said, "I already have." After, they lit a small fire in the ashes of the barn. Not to mourn, but to begin again. Willa held her old wedding ring, tarnished, empty, and dropped it into the flames. "She died in that river," she said softly. "You married the woman who came out." He kissed her then, not for show, not even for comfort. Just a promise. Weeks passed. The lavender bloomed by the window. Children no longer pointed. When Willa walked through town with her head high, women moved aside, not to shame, but to allow her passage. A child called out, "Mrs. Mercer," and she turned surprised. She smiled, didn't correct him, and in the quiet of the cabin that night, with the fire soft and the walls holding peace, Silas sat in his chair while Willa hummed an old hymn from memory. Not for God, not for redemption, just for herself. Outside the wind shifted, but no fire came. And somewhere downstream, the river carried nothing but water now. So if you find yourself cast aside, left to drift in someone else's shame, remember this. The world may watch you burn, but grace walks in on its own 2 feet. Sometimes with a hammer, sometimes with a ring, always with open hands.